The argument is this. In general, we can say, not just in the ancient Athenian polis, but the town and the city was, we heard it today again, freie Luft der Stadt. You know, we talk about the city is freedom, the city is participation, the city is mobility. That's always been true. In the ancient world, people went from the countryside to Damascus or Alexandria or Rome or Athens or Thebes because the city had the opportunity. The city had a sense of freedom. The city allowed us to breathe freedom. So it had the great virtue of freedom, but it had the vice, it had the problem of parochialism, of locality. Because the whole reason the nation state came is because things got larger, territories got larger, you got a whole people, a German people, a French people, and you couldn't govern just in the city. So how do we go back just to the polis? We can't. But we can go forward to the cosmopolis, a parliament of cities, a world association of cities, cities that cooperate together. And even in the ancient world, cities knew that. We know from the ancient world, if you studied your Greek, you know that the Peloponnesian Wars were very powerful. But few people know about the Mediterranean League of Cities, which allowed cities around the Mediterranean from the 2nd century BC forward to cooperate and work together. We know about the wars of the Middle Ages and the early modern period, but not too many people remember the Hansa. And the Hansa League in the 10th and 11th century allowed cities up and down the coast, from London all the way up to Russia, to cooperate together. And 12, 14 years ago, a new Hansa League was created, and it's there now with those cities along the North Sea, you know, same thing all the way from Gdansk and Rotterdam and so on. So cities are very good at cooperating. They don't make war on each other, they cooperate. They're interdependent, they're transactional, they're based on trade. 90% of cities are on water, oceans, seas, rivers, because of interaction, transportation, mobility, trade. Those are all the things that characterize the cities, and they help make cities very good candidates for governance and global governance. So polis, great for democracy, not so good for global concerns. Cosmopolis, yes, they're a union of cities, a parliament of mayors can address in common the common global problems they face in each city. Urbanization has been the history of the world, and urbanization in the last 150 or 200 years since the Industrial Revolution has been the fate of the world. The UN announced 3 years ago that half of the world's population live in cities. In North America, in Japan, in Europe, it's 75 to 80% of people live in cities, and more come to cities. It's estimated by 2050, 75% of the whole world will live in cities. We know it's not just New York and Paris and Frankfurt. We know that in China, they build new cities of 1 million, 10 a year. 10 new cities a year. We know the new mega cities of Brazzaville and Lagos in Africa, of Rio and Sao Paulo in Mexico City, of Chongqing in China. Chongqing, after the war, had 2 million people. Chongqing today has 30 million people in one city. You know, so we see that urbanization is the future. Does that create problems? Of course. Is there corruption? Yes. Does democracy always work? No. But the city is where the future will happen. So that's where we have to solve our problems. And the good news is that's where, because there's more democracy, more participation, and more hope, even where you have many problems and difficulties, inequalities, not enough housing, insufficient schooling, segregation, lots of problems in the cities, it's there where the solutions have to be found. Don't ask me, ask the people who are living in the ghettos. Ask the people, you know, ask the Turks who live in Duisburg or in Essen. Ask the Syrians who live in Aarhus, Denmark. Ask the Mexicans who live in Los Angeles. Are they there because they want to live in a place where there's more social division and less opportunity? No. They want to live in a place where there's less social division and more social opportunity, and that's why they're there. There's this notion somehow that people who live in ghettos and immigrants and so on, someone puts a gun to their head and said, you must live in Berlin. We're not going to allow you to live in Morocco anymore. We put a gun to your head, go to Berlin and live. That's not how it works. The people who leave Tijuana and go to San Diego, nobody forces them. On the contrary, they force their way across the border. They don't wait for a visa. They go because they see the opportunity of the cities. So is there social division in cities? Yes. Are there ghettos? Yes. Is there prejudice and racism? Yes. But poor people and immigrants themselves will tell you they have a much better chance to make it there. And we heard in the presentations this morning a variety of approaches and solutions. Mr. Helweg from Hamburg talked about the way in which housing can make a difference, talked about the way in which when you provide resources for the parts of the city that are more stressed and poor, you make those a destination for other people. I had an example for him. When I was in Aarhus, Aarhus has about 8% Syrians and Middle Eastern people living there, and most of them live on the outskirts of Aarhus, not downtown. It's like Paris, it's like the banlieue. But here's what's interesting. The community of Syrians have created their own souk, their own bazaar, in an old marketplace. And they've made it such a destination point that people, Danes from downtown Aarhus, go out on the weekend to the souk, to go to the restaurants, to shop, because it's a terrific, lively center. The very thing Helweg said. So the cities are the future, and here's the bottom line. The bottom line is, you may like cities, you may not like cities. You may think that they increase segregation, you might think that they diminish segregation, but cities are our future. Urbanization is our reality. We have to deal with the problems of the cities. It's not going to be that 100 years from now everybody lives on the farm again. Everybody goes back to the villages. That will never happen. The city is the future of civilization, the future of the world, so that's where we have to deal with democracy, with the economy, with jobs, with health, and that's where we will do it, and that's where it's happening today, and that's why we cities need to work together in a global parliament of mayors. There's only one small problem: human beings. Dimension. We're frail, we're weak, we're greedy, we're contestable, we fight, we argue, we're bigoted, we're ignorant. And that's always the problem. The only thing that gets in the way of human perfection is human beings. But we find them in cities as well as in the country. But I say that only to say, other than that, which is a problem, human frailty, human mortality, human greed, human selfishness is always a problem. But cities have found a better way to deal with them than most other systems. So from that point of view, I would argue that while we will always have corruption and greed and ambition and selfishness, and they will be a problem in cities too, but the city is the best place to do that, because the city is based on density, it's based on cooperation, it requires that people learn to live together even if they hate one another. If you live in villages, you can have one village here and one village here, and you don't have to live together. In the city, you have to live with people you don't know and maybe you don't like. So the city forces cooperation. The city forces creativity. The city forces mobility, and that's a good thing. So I think, given the problem of human beings, the best way to deal with the vices and setbacks of what it means to be human is to work through and with cities. And that's not just the lesson of democracy, it's the lesson of history, because urbanization has been the history of the world. Hamburg, we saw it here. Berlin is a city without industry, and yet it's become once again the capital of Europe. Detroit is an example of what can be done, because Detroit went bankrupt, but in fact, there are small family firms growing up there. The black people who live there have created their own civil structures. If you actually visit Detroit, it is a place where there are a lot of urban pioneers. Young people and artists are the urban pioneers. They go to the neighborhoods that nobody wants to live in, and they make them habitable. They open theaters. The Radiosystem Theater down by Ostbahnhof in Berlin. That was a neighborhood 15 years ago that was just completely off. Now everybody wants to be there, because Radiosystem has created a Gemeinschaft, a Gemeinde in that area that everybody wants to go to. Mumbai slums. In the book by Catherine Boo I mentioned, Behind the Beautiful Tomorrows, even there, the poorest 12-year-olds who make a business out of going to the dumps where all the garbage is put and go through and sell things, many of them have become middle-class businessmen through the work they do in the dumps and so on. So there are a million good stories about what can happen when you're in a city. And you don't have to ask me, because that's what I said this morning. Ask people why they go to the city. They don't go to be oppressed. They don't go to be victimized. They don't go because they know there'll be racist locals who won't like them. They know that's going to happen. They go anyway. Why do they go? Because they like racism? No, because they understand that there's an opportunity there. They understand from the people who are already there, who say, come, come, you'll be much better. Yeah, there's lots of problems. There'll be stupid locals who hate you, and so on, and there'll be bigotry. But you have a much greater opportunity here. And that's why cities will thrive and do thrive, and thrive because also of immigration. The thing the Germans have to learn, Germany, France, Italy have declining populations. The old native populations, they don't reproduce themselves. They're pessimistic, they're old, and the population goes down. Every developed country has a declining population. Japan, even China now, with the one-child policy. But you know, the country that doesn't have a declining population, even though it's an old traditional state, the United States. We have 3 to 4% population growth a year. Why? Not because of people like me, but because of our Mexican and our Asian immigrants who come in and are robust, and they reproduced, and there are a lot of young people to take the jobs. Europe's going to be a very old place with not enough young people to pay for the Sozialstaat that the old people will need. We don't have that problem in the United States because immigration, legal and illegal, brings lots and lots of people. And so, in fact, the great thing about the city is that it constantly refreshes itself. It brings new people in, it draws new people in, even though the old residents don't like it. But the people come in, and that makes the cities constantly fresh and new and interesting and vibrant and difficult and unequal and prejudiced, but nonetheless a great place to live and deal with all the problems of modernity. The Duisburg has a lot of problems. Really, no. I mean, I do sense that this is not. I spend a lot of time in Germany. Last week I was in Mannheim and in Karlsruhe. You know, and the week before I was in Graz and Vienna, and I go to Berlin all the time. I go to Hamburg all the time. Like every society, there are some cities that do less well than others. And a couple of the speakers noticed that we have side by side Düsseldorf and Duisburg. And why should Düsseldorf do so well and Duisburg have so many problems? That is a model experiment. One has to go and examine what went wrong. Why is Duisburg having so many problems? I know it had poor leadership. I know 5 years ago there was a big scandal and so on, but it's not just the mayor. It's not just that. There's something, this is a great laboratory to look at why side by side two cities with the same history, the same possibilities, the same region, the same geography, the same industrial background in the Ruhrgebiet. Why should one do so well, the other do so badly? So that, you know, it raises the question of cities are a wonderful promise for the future, but there are many problems, and some cities, whether it's Detroit or Duisburg, have a hard time, and we need to understand why that is so that we can deal with those issues. So that's perhaps the most important thing. Inequality means no democracy. You can't have a democracy and have deep inequalities side by side. Inequality is not a problem for democracy. Inequality is the negation of democracy. And of course, it creates a vicious circle, because if you have inequality, that separates people, and then the people who are poor and are marginalized, they have poor education, and they have poor opportunities, and that increases inequality. So it gets worse and worse. It takes radical political and civic intervention to deal with inequality. And political education and civic education and basic education is one part of it, but politics is another part of it. Because you can only achieve public goals like integration, full employment, fairness, dignity through a strong public sector. And in Germany today, like the rest of the Western world, or the whole world, more and more people say, we don't need the state, we need the market. The market will do it. Let the market do civic education. Oh yes. Let the market do social housing. Oh yes, really? That's going to happen? So the first battle against inequality is a political battle, that we retain the instrument of our democratic institutions, our democratic schools, to do the fight, because if we deprive ourselves of the instruments, if we privatize, if we say let the market deal with inequality, the market doesn't deal with inequality, the market produces inequality. So we need something to deal with the market, and that's the public sector, that's citizenship, that's civil society. So a strong democracy is the only way to immunize ourselves against inequality, but inequality undermines democracy. So we have to break that cycle, and we have to strengthen our democratic institutions, and if we do that, then we will diminish inequality, and we'll make the possibility of a free city life, the freie Luft der Stadt, will become a reality.